So I hope that this knowledge about how we make decisions, how we make moral decisions, can actually inform people and make them look at their own decisions completely differently and think more. I mean, maybe we could be so lucky as to get rationality back into our thinking, because we are, I think, going more and more in the direction of just following our emotions. Another area I think illustrates this sort of revolutionary potential in thinking is the whole research into happiness. And I suppose happiness is a topic that it's very fitting to talk about it here in Amsterdam, since you have the World Happiness Database here. And it's also interesting for me as a person from Denmark that we keep being at the absolute top every year. I think for almost 30 years we've been the happiest country in the world. And when you tell Danish people that, they always say, that can't be true. That can't be true. I mean, everyone I know is on SSRIs, so 10% of the population is on antidepressants. I would say maybe that's why. But anyway, the whole sort of happiness field is interesting, I think, in the way that we look at it. It used to be that happiness was not a goal in itself. I mean, my grandparents' generation, for example, would say that happiness was something it was a side effect. You could, if you led a good life and you took care of your children and did whatever was good and moral, you could be so lucky as to experience happiness now and then. But now, in our society, we sort of want happiness as the ultimate prize. I mean, we have been rich and fat for so long that there are no more sort of physical needs or need for, realizing our potential, whatever. We can basically do what we want. So we want that sort of lasting, the happiness in itself as a sort of consumer good almost. And that started being very obvious about 10 years ago when the psychologists started to have a new group of, you couldn't even call them patients, they were more like clients, because they came in and they said, it's not that I'm depressed or sick in any way, but I don't feel happy. Can you do something about that? Because I ought to be happy because, my economy is great, my kids are behaving, my wife is wonderful, even my dog is nice. So, I should be happy. And of course, at first, psychologists were at a loss because they were trained in, treating sick people, treating depressed people. And suddenly, what were they going to do with these people who weren't happy? And then, of course, if there is a need, there is also an answer to that need. There is a market. And so some people started thinking about positive psychology. Martin Seligman, for example, the guru and one of the founders of positive psychology, as an American, and he had been treating depressed people for years, for ages, and he was kind of, they started to irritate him, these people, because you could do something for them, but they would never really be very happy. So anyway, he said to himself that it might be psychologists' next task to actually be able to take normal people and make them more happy. So of course, positive psychology became this big wave of basically coming up with life strategies that would, that would increase people's happiness. And the thing is, of course, that we've known for decades that people do have an individual happiness level. There's like a set point. It's like a thermostat that we have our individual happiness level. If you ask people on a scale from 1 to 10, how satisfied are you with life? They will have a typical answer. So for a person, it will be either a 5 or a 7. And if you ask them a year from now, 2 years from now, it'll be the same. And so the positive psychologists wanted to, get people from 5 to 8 or from 7 to 10 or whatever. And they came up with different strategies to do that. Interestingly enough, they're usually strategies that you can find in most of the big religions. They're like, you should be, grateful for what you have, and you should, one of the very efficient things to raise your happiness level is to do good deeds for other people. And so they figured out by doing big surveys and experiments with people that if you want to raise your happiness level, you should basically do 5 good deeds a week. And you should collect them all, do them in one day. That's the most efficient thing. So that's one way of sort of fiddling with the happiness thermostat. The other way is brain science getting into the thing. And of course, brain scientists will ask, so where is this thermostat? How can we regulate it? Where is it in the brain? And there's one guy who's actually, he's called, in the US, he's called the king of happiness research, Richard Davidson, and he's at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, which is, I visited there, and it's a horrible place, but a lot of happiness research goes on. Anyway, so Richard Davidson was also, he did a lot of research into depression for many years, and he had an observation that made him think, because he had a group of patients coming in with very, very deep depressions that were very difficult to treat. And all these people had one thing in common. They had brain damage in the left frontal cortex. And what was interesting was that he never saw anyone come in with the same kind of damage to the right frontal cortex. So he thought there must be something going on having to do with the happiness thermostat here. So what he did, he called in a lot of volunteers, students, that you can pay them $10 and they'll do anything. So what he did was he sat his students down and asked them, of course, so what is your happiness level? How happy are you? Some would answer 7, some would answer 8 and 5. And then what he did was he took their EEG, basically asked them to just relax, close their eyes, and he measured their overall brain activity with 128 electrodes. And what came out of that was an interesting curve, because he could see a very straightforward connection between the happiness level and the relationship between the activity in the left frontal cortex and the right frontal cortex. So it seemed that the more activity, more relative activity you had on the left, the happier you were. And he could call in the same people 6 months later, 2 years later, and he would see the same results. And he started doing this in more and more people, and it seems that that curve is really pretty true, that there is a relationship between the left frontal cortex activity and your happiness level. Now, when you look into it deeper, it seems that it has to do with some kind of circuit on the left that is very good at suppressing negative emotional activity in the amygdala, for example. So what happens is that people who are very satisfied with life, very happy on average, are just better at suppressing the negative emotional activity that goes on all the time. So, of course, the next question is, so how do you regulate this? How do you get more activity on the left as opposed to the right frontal cortex? And Davidson had an interesting thought, because he had been doing Buddhist meditation since the 70s, and he had spent a lot of time in India with the Dalai Lama and his other lamas. And so he noticed that these lamas who meditate basically every day, lots of hours, 20 years, that they were very, very, very happy in a sort of different way than, us normal people. Very unstressed as well. So he asked some of these lamas to come to Wisconsin to actually be measured. And what he saw was that they were completely off the curve. They had, a lot more activity on the left frontal cortex than any normal person he'd ever seen. So his theory was, okay, maybe you can take normal, stressed out, unhappy people and make them meditate and maybe change their brain activity. And that's exactly what you can do.